And your number one on YouTube was how to live and move overseas. So let's get into that one. I'm gonna take a quick sip and we'll get into that one. And I'll tell you guys some little tips and tricks on how to move and live overseas and some pro tips and some things you need to know. Yeah, let's do it. Cheers. Clink, 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 clink. Thank you guys so much for being here on our Friday night kickbacks. Smash, smash, smash that like button. Okay, so I have like 8 ways that you can move overseas that I want to run off to you guys really quickly. You can study abroad. That's what I did. I decided that I want to get my master's overseas. So I found a reputable program that would admit me with my credentials. And then I applied for the program, got in, and then I actually did use US Department of Education loans to go and pay for the program. Okay, so this was my master's. It was not my undergrad. I do know some people that have done their undergrad overseas and used US loans to do so. Tia Taylor is a huge person on YouTube that did that for her undergrad in Italy, in Bocconi. I did my, at Bocconi University, I did my master's at University of London, Royal Holloway campus. For my MBA, and we both took, I believe she took student loans, but I took student loans and the US financed it, right? And so I would not recommend taking student loans for undergrad, but you gotta do what you gotta do. I took for master's because I felt confident doing that and I wanted to double my salary, which it did. And so studying abroad is a way that you can move overseas. Another way that you can move overseas is just do an international job search. Go on Indeed, go on LinkedIn, go on Monster, go on LinkedIn and look at your people that you know and pick up the phone and call them and say, hey, I want an opportunity to work overseas. I see that you are posting this opportunity. How do I best position myself to be in the running for it? So you can apply directly to international job searches. And I believe in that video, I mentioned some specific sites that are for international job hunt that you can look for. If you are in a career that is like a very high demand career and the particular country that you want to go to has a lack of that career skill set, it's easier for you to get in the country. So for instance, say you want to go to London and right now they're having a deficit of nurses, of registered nurses in London, and you're a registered nurse. It would be easier for you to apply for a job and get sponsored to be there, because when you're coming into another country, you need to be sponsored. Your visa needs to be sponsored. So if they have a deficit of the skill set that you possess, it's going to be easier for you to get the job. So what you would first do is look at the country you want to go and go do some research on their immigration site to see what jobs and careers they're looking for. They're actively looking to bring into their country. And so immigration sites for these countries do show that. So just do a little Googling, do a little Google schmoogle, and find out who they're looking for. And then you can identify if your job or your career or your skill set falls into what they're looking for. And you're you're ahead of the game in terms of being able to get your visa to be sponsored to go to the country to go work. Yeah. So the third option is secondment. Secondment means you work for a multinational company where you currently live, and they have an international arm, and you're seconded, or you're allowed to go work for in the international arm of your domestic company. So if you're in Canada or Mexico or US or anywhere where you are, South Africa, and particularly you're in South Africa, you want to go work in Australia, your company has a branch in Australia, you can be seconded to go and work in Australia. So you would have to do the internal paperwork and do the internal research to find out where your company is also headquartered and see if you can go over there via a secondment. Another part of secondment is sometimes these companies have a global rotation program. So if you work for one of the big consulting firms or anything like that, sometimes they have a global rotation program where you get to apply to be in the program and do a 6 months rotation in London, 6 months rotation in Ghana, 6 months rotation in Australia, 6 months in Mexico, and they rotate you out. So look at the opportunities that currently exist where you are working and where you are studying, and see if there are rotational programs or study abroad programs that you could use to go spend some time overseas. Yeah. So if you're studying, there will be study abroad programs that you could apply to. And if you're working, depending on the type of company that you're working for, if it's a multinational, you might be able to get into a global rotation program with your company and go overseas for 6 months, a year, 2 years, or however long. Yeah. And au pair, that's a number four or five option. Au pair is a nanny. It's a glorified nanny, but usually wealthy people who live in other countries, they're looking for au pairs, AU space PAIR, and they usually like au pairs who speak other languages or that they bring something to the table because they're wanting you to help raise their children for a period of time, and they want, wealthy people like their children to, liaise with people who speak other languages, or that you can teach them something, or things like that. So you can look at au pair programs where you go live with a host family, to care for their children, and live overseas, and pretty much everything is paid for. This is usually for younger females, but I'm sure younger males can work as well. Maybe the family has a lot of boys and they want a male au pair. But do some research into being an au pair to be able to live overseas. Another option is the Peace Corps. The Peace Corps. So Peace Corps is almost like a program that you join to go do work and volunteerism in another country. I'm reluctant to say third world country or anything like that, because that's really just a savior complex term that we use to denigrate other different systems and different countries. But essentially they send the Peace Corps in to go and help, bring food to, where there's been a hurricane, or where there's been an earthquake, or where there's been a war-torn issue and things like that, and you go in and you support the reconciliation of the community in some particular area. And so Peace Corps is definitely something that you can apply for. So Google schmoogle that, and you'll be able to international travel with the Peace Corps as well. And with that one, you're not an individual traveling, you're with a collection of people in a well-organized system. Now, you might not be in the most luxurious circumstances. You might not be able to do everything that you want to do, but you will be serving your international community. So I feel like a lot of people like the Peace Corps for that philanthropic kind of service to humanity piece. So if that's what you like, Peace Corps may work for you to go overseas. Yeah. Teach English as a second language. Teach, a lot of people I know, they went to, a friend of mine was wanting to go to Japan to teach English. Another friend of mine actually went to Korea to teach English. And so I find that it's mainly Asian countries that want to bring English as a native speaker people over to teach for a certain amount of time their younger students English language. So definitely, if you feel like, oh, I'd like to teach and I can, build curriculum to be a teacher overseas, I think it's called, try TEFL, and Google that and put teaching foreign, oh goodness, do some Googling, but basically you're teaching English to foreign students. And what I saw, it was a lot of Asian countries do that. Now, this was before COVID. I think COVID nowadays has made people do a lot of the teaching stuff via Zoom. But you may still, maybe in a year or two, there still may be an opportunity for you to do the in-person teaching and go live in a village in Korea and South Korea and teach the students English, and then live and work in the community. So teaching is definitely an option. And as I said before, primarily I've seen that for Asian countries. Yeah. Seventh one here is just travel. So I will say that you have to remember that some of these countries have a good relationship with the US, and you can go and live there for up to 6 months without a visa or without any issues. Now, can you work there and make money? No. But can you just go visit and still be okay for 6 months, 4 months, 3 months? Yes. So what you would do is look at the particular country and see what's the extended amount of time that I could actually just go work from that country. If you work remotely, like everybody is, like most of us are working remotely right now, or if you work for yourself, if you are a content creator, If you are a freelancer or you are part of the gig economy and you don't have to work from a particular place, pack up your laptop, pack up your two little bags, and go live in Mexico for 6 months. Go live in London for 6 months. And as I said, you can't work there, but because you're working remotely from where you're actually from, it shouldn't be a problem. But you can go station somewhere for a few months and live there, do your American job overseas, so long as you're allowed to. You'd have to check with your employer, or if you work for yourself, you do what you want to do, period. But if you're allowed to, you can go and station somewhere for, I believe, up to 6 months, and you'd have to go look at the immigration site for the country that you're interested in visiting or working from. Yeah, so that's easy if you don't have to be paid through anything, any company there, right? So if you already have your income, or you already stashed your money and you already know, I got 6 months, I'm straight, I'm gonna go live in Bali, you know what I mean, and be good, you know what I mean, for 6 months to a year. You can definitely do that without having to worry about immigration and things like that. But do some Googling on the immigration site. And the last one I have here is just apply directly for immigration. So as you know, some people are immigrants to their country, wherever you're watching from, and you know that if you're trying to get in a country, you can actually just go to the immigration and do the paperwork and try to get a visa to live and work in the country, or try to apply to get a green card to live and work in the country if you've had a visa for a while. So there are, it's not always do a trick like, be an au pair or study abroad or Peace Corps or go teach or anything like that. Sometimes you can just go to the immigration site and read up and find out exactly what you need to do to be able to get into the country. Yeah. So again, it's all about doing the research, identifying the country that you want to live in and going there. So how do you identify the country that you're interested in? Visit, travel, go there, for 2 weeks, talk to people that live there. Maybe look on your social media and find a friend of yours, or even make a friend who lives in that country. Check out YouTube videos and find Americans or South Africans or Germans who live in the country that you're interested in and watch their YouTube videos. Talk to them and see what it's really like living in the country, and that'll help you decide. For me, I knew I wanted to study in London, and so I felt like I could really vibe with it. I never visited before, but there was something about it that I knew just felt good to me, and so I just applied to study and got in and made the move. But again, that's probably because my intuition was very clear about what I wanted to do next. You know what I mean? And so, you never know. But yeah, you can always do the research on YouTube and Instagram. I think YouTube is really good for doing the research on finding people who live in the country that you're interested in, and then just watching their lifestyle and seeing how it goes and asking them questions too. But again, always do your own one-on-one research. Don't just rely on talking heads on YouTube, because people be just trying to get clicks and views and don't be telling the full story. You know what I mean? So definitely do your own research, but you can start with YouTube, Googling. YouTube is pretty much a search engine, and you can look for anything on here. Anything on here. Okay? So what are some tips and tricks I can tell you about living overseas? One key thing that was really interesting to me about living overseas, and the key tips and tricks, and hold on, before I jump into key tips and tricks, let me look in the comments and see what you guys are talking about. Yeah. All right, so Keith is saying go to conventions in larger cities, Miami, Vegas, Chicago, network that way, check with the DoD contractors. So this is if you're a professional, you know what I mean? You can go to conferences. Sometimes your companies has conferences overseas or things like that. If you're a vendor or something, you can try to finagle your way into going to these business activities overseas. So that's definitely a way. Check with nations that have agreements with the U.S. government. Yep, that's definitely a way as well. Google Schmoogle. Google has everything you need. And so, you just Google it and find out who's on the red list, who's on the red zone, and all of that. But just do your own research and things like that. Okay, so let me take a sip, and then we're going to talk about some key, two tips that I know about traveling and working abroad, and then we're gonna call it a wrap. We already been on for a little over almost an hour and a half. It's looking like, and y'all know when my water is almost up. You know, it's almost time for me to go. So chime in in the comments. Anything, any last comments that you guys want me to talk about? We'll talk about it for this edition of the Kickback. Earlier today, we talked about using your intuition to go hard after your dreams, not being boxed in, following what your soul's calling is telling you to do, and how to quiet your mind so that you can actually tap in, download, channel, hear, feel, receive what your intuition, what your soul is telling you to do and calling you towards, what your passion is calling you towards. And the second part of the live was talking about how you can travel, live, study, work overseas, which we went into. We had 8 or 9 options there, and I dropped the link in the comments so that you guys can actually watch the full-on video that I created about that. And now I'm going to tell you about 2 things, 2 pro tips, key tips that I feel like is good for I feel like is good for living overseas. One thing about living overseas is that all of the stereotypes that you have from your home country do not necessarily translate to the new country. Whoa, excuse me, the water's got a little bubbly here. Do not always translate to the new country. So there were a lot, like here in the US, people always, because of the way I speak, because I speak well, they always kind of know that, they always ask me, especially if I'm in like Miami or Florida, they'll ask you where you're from. You know, they'll immediately ask you where you're from or where your family's from. Whereas when I was over in London, nobody ever asked me where my family's from. They just always would just introduce me as Kells, the American. So it was the most American I had ever been. Another thing that I talk a lot about the stereotypes in London and Europe in general, when I lived over there, was that in the US at the time, I had a tendency to feel very invisible. The stereotypes of Black women, as you guys can probably tell online, are not always the greatest. And that translates into reality as well. You know, people have, you know, a tendency to try to denigrate Black women a lot. But when I was over in Europe, it was completely the opposite. The people treated me so well, so loving, so much light, so much love. You know, just it was just a completely different experience. And I think my Black friends over in London would say it's because I was American, mainly because I feel like the Black people in London sometimes have issues with racism as we do here in the US. But I don't know what it was, but as far as I knew, the people knew how to pronounce my name perfectly. They would invite me everywhere. Just love from day one. From day one. Whereas sometimes in the US, depending on where you are, it's hard to make friends, as I talked about in my last video, DC versus ATL. When I first moved to ATL way back in 2006, it was tough for me here. I felt like an alien half the time. I don't even know if I talked about that in my DC versus ATL last live that I did. If you didn't see that one, catch that one. Yeah, there's a lot of gems in that one. You know, but when I went to London, I was immediately like Beyonce. I'm not even gonna hold you. I'm not even gonna hold you. I was dead Beyonce and Rihanna. I don't know why, but I just had that experience. And so what I would say is a key tip and a pro thing that you need to understand when you're going to these other countries is that the stereotypes that you hold about yourself and your personal identity from the country that you are in will not necessarily hold true in the new country that you're now living in. So you need to be able to open your mind and flex your mind to the new persona that you might transform into. And to be honest with you, it feels so good to release yourself of an American construct of who you are. Just again, talking about releasing yourself out of the box. When you go overseas, you are out of the stereotypes and the box-inness of your American perceptions of who you are, based on whatever gender, and sexual expression, identity, skin color, what do you call that, where your people them is from, you know, all of that. You're released from all of that and you get to be somebody completely different if you want to. And it is so amazing. It's so freeing. You feel like a kid again. You know what I mean? You feel like a kid again in the enthusiasm and the excitement, but you have the mind and the experience of however old you are. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds. So I would say when you're going overseas, remember not to box yourself in and to let yourself observe who you now are in your new country. You know what I mean? And this is one of the main reasons why I think travel, it has been one of the most transformative things for me in formulating my identity outside of the United States and outside of the constructs and the stereotypes that are imposed on me based on this body that I occupy here. You know what I mean? And so I am a huge advocate for living and traveling overseas and allowing yourself to transform into somebody different, you know? So that's one key thing that I want you to know about traveling overseas. One pro tip: be open to who you will transform into and become based on the new energy and the new space and the new persona and stereotypes that you now occupy overseas. Be careful, the pendulum might swing both ways. So depending on what country you're in, it might be a worse perception or it might be a better perception. So be careful, because there's a lot of countries on this globe that don't particularly love Americans. And I think Black Americans they're okay with, but sometimes countries are not so much okay with white Americans. So you have to be careful about where you're at. You'll hear a lot that French people don't like Americans, but usually that they're talking about white Americans. They don't not usually talking about like Black Americans. A lot of places where you go where there's when you're Black American, they love you, because they see you as there's just an elevation that is an elevated perception. I don't know why, but all I know is I enjoyed it. I absolutely enjoyed it. Hey, Matthew. You know what I mean? And so that's one thing. Another pro tip that you have to be concerned about when you are living and traveling overseas is reverse culture shock. So what is reverse culture shock? On my channel, one of my most popular videos is a reverse culture shock video. I'm gonna try to put it in the chat right now just so you guys could take a peek at it if you wanna see it. If you go to my videos and go to sort it by most popular videos, you'll see that the one I talk about, the second most popular video, 128,000 views, is me talking about reverse culture shock. And so what do we mean? I'm gonna put it in the link in the chat right now so you guys can take a peek at that. That's a long time video, and not every idea that I express in that video is still 100% accurate, you know what I mean? Because time passes and you learn, but I think it's an important thing for you to know when you travel is that you may be subject to reverse culture shock. So let me tell you what that is. Reverse culture shock is when you live overseas and you live in a different country for a while, and when you return home or to your native country, you don't feel as welcomed or as comfortable with your new identity in your old country. So it's a really weird experience. You see things differently. So for instance, let me give you one example. I gave you an example earlier of like when I went to London and when I went to Europe, my reception as a Black woman was so good that when I came back to the United States, I could gauge my reception and how it wasn't the same. Desirability didn't feel the same at the time when I came back. However long I posted that video ago, and it was disheartening. So it's a reverse culture shock thing, right? Because now how you see yourself and how you feel about yourself and your reception in the world in your new place was heightened, and so now you come back to where you're actually from and it's back down, and it kind of sucks, and you have to deal with that. You have to deal with going back into your old identity, even though you're now this new elevated person that sees yourself differently in the world. So that's a reverse culture shock issue. Another reverse culture shock issue is that living in the U.S., we have guns. We have a gun issue, and we have what is that thing called? A crisis as it relates to guns and shooting and killing. When you live here, you are it's so ingrained in the culture that, you kind of just deal with it. But when you live elsewhere where guns are not an issue, and you see how the US looks to people who don't have that gun issue, we look crazy. We look like crazed lunatics. And so that was a culture shock issue as well, because now you're having to move back into a country that you know is like not perceived well on that particular topic, and you now relate to living in a place that doesn't have that issue, but now you're going back into your original place where before it wasn't that much of an issue with you because you grew up in it, but coming back into it, having not lived into it, it creates an issue for you, or anxiety or discomfort. So that's what reverse culture shock is. It's going back into your old paradigm and finding discomfort in that, because now you've lived elsewhere and you lived in a different country and different paradigm, see things differently. And so now you're having to find yourself comfortable with things that you no longer find comfortable. So yeah, reverse culture shock is definitely a pro tip you should know about living overseas, and then letting your mind flex and be open to who you will become living in your new country. That is definitely a pro tip. Um, I love travel and I love living overseas. What's another pro tip? Thank you, Boom. Dang, girl, you got so much gems. Shaking my head. It's crazy. You know, you know, I always said to my brother, I have a brother, I have a few brothers, but I always said to my brother that I will never not tell you what I wish somebody would have told me. I would never not tell you what I wish somebody would have told me. So that's what I'm doing on the channel, is I share with you guys what I know, not as somebody who knows it all, but I'm just sharing with you what I wish somebody would have told me. That's it, period, full stop. And I want you guys to do the same in the comments. We learn from the collective wisdom of the Kells community over here. So if you have a gem to drop, feel free to drop it in the comments, and I will definitely amplify what you have to say. But I will never not tell you what I wish somebody would have told me. You know what I mean? If it's been a blessing to me in my life, I absolutely open-heartedly let you know that this has served me. So hopefully it will serve you in some capacity, if not now, in the future.